All right, so we're picking back up again with our discussion of community policing. And as we introduced in the last time, right, we know that police have a lot of power. What am I drawing here? This is the muscle emoji, right? And I mean, like maybe like some SpongeBob arms, but put a little vein there so you know that we're flexing, right? So when we think about like this power that comes into place, right, in this trade and exchange that ends up happening, right? We talked about last time how we want to, um, have some control over that power, and really some of that control, right, is increasing the agency of the public. So, like, what do I mean by that, right? When I'm talking about like agency of the public, right? If you are equipping someone, right, to in the government to control the population in times of people, who are going to disrupt, a sense of order or a semblance of it, right? We want to have citizen input and say into the process of what's happening. So, what we're talking about when we think about community policing is increasing community power uh, to increase to control the population and to make it feel like the police are accountable and really reinforce that they serve the public, right? So in this case, then, what do we want then, right? If we want to have police that are, like really, servicing, right? So when we think about like what does accountability or what does it look like in this like framework, right? So when we think about this kind of like police accountability, there's some things that we probably want. One, we want them to, listen to the public, right? So they actually care about, what we say, what we think, what we identify as problems, as, one example, right? We want them to not only, listen, but also to respond, um, with community concerns. So we don't necessarily want them just to listen, right? Because if you're listening, but there's no change in your behavior, there's no change in the actions itself, then are you like really accomplishing anything, right? Because all of us can just sit and listen to one another, but if there's no change and there's no action, then it's like a false promise, a false hope of something happening. And that's true of any relationship, friendship, romantic, casual, it doesn't really matter, right? Like each relationship that we have in a professor student, kind of situation, right? If there is this listening that occurs, but there's no demonstrated change, then there is a weakening of that trust in that behavior. So we want police to respond to it, right? So the other part to this, right, is that because we're listening to the public and we're responding by changes with community input, right? So we are trying to create a police force that is, adaptive to community needs, and as a result of that, becomes more service oriented. And that's really underneath this kind of philosophy of police. Then, by having a service, then you aren't necessarily going by strict numbers per se, right? But you are going about your ability to talk to other people, respond to their complaints, taking in their sort of response and accountability, and basically we want this to have what, right? A more I guess like equitable and just perhaps police department, right? That's ultimately, what community policing tries to do, right? From a philosophical standpoint, is to create like this police department that serves the public and acts in a way that it responds to community needs, right? So a couple of questions then, right? So if this is exactly, like what, is like the philosophy, right? What is the intended outcome? Because it's probably good, that let's pretend, for example, accept the premise that having a responsive, accountable police department is good, right? Let's accept that. So what do we get out of this, right? So it's one thing to happen, like this, but like what do we get out of it? So what would we get out of this, right? Oftentimes, right, when we look at police, right, and how we view their effectiveness, the first and foremost thing, right, is that, we tend to think of police effectiveness as what, right? It's going to equal crime going down, right? So that's the first thing. Is that, if we adopt any kind of police strategy, right, if we're changing our philosophy or if we're changing our methods and practice, then what are we trying to do from a police standpoint? Because they are judged by their ability to get crime down, and really they're not judged by anything else, right, in terms of effectiveness, or at least, as it is right now. We want crime to go down, right? So police departments are going to be highly sensitive to that kind of thing, right? Now, outside of that, right, what else do we want to have, right? So we would also maybe, if we are adapting this philosophy to be more service-oriented, to really be protective of other people and to grow, right? We also want to have trust in police and increase their legitimacy, so that we believe that the police are equipped in order to handle our problems related to crime, and that we trust them for doing so. So that is, a related outcome to that. Another aspect as well is that when we think about this sort of outcome, right, if we are trusting the police and we want this to occur, right, we probably want fear of crime to go down as well. So that people maybe rely and trust the police to handle or take care of a problem. They're more, they feel like they can do something, or they know that they have someone that can intervene on their behalf and take care of an issue, right? So that even if something bad doesn't happen, that's like they believe the problem is going to be resolved. But that's, more for like a community aspect, right? One of this is a police, outcome, right? But also one that's good for society, right? But what do police hope to get by adopting this, right? So if you have like trust and good faith, right? What would this get you, right? Possibly better or a compliant public. So, if you have a better compliant public, they're more likely to listen to your kind of demands, or when you're requested, they're more likely to comply with investigations, follow orders. There's a lower risk to officer lives if this happens. It's a bit more, harmonious in that case then. So maybe, indirectly, we would hope that there would be fewer attacks on police or fewer injuries. We can better investigate crimes that are coming out of this kind of thing, out of having a more equitable, service-oriented police force. So we want to have that as well, right? And really, we want to entrust and empower community strength. So not only does it work with police, but we have a better attitudes towards this tool, social control, and this could really be occurred, right? The other part of this too is that if we have better trust in police and that we think that they're being responsive and we have an overall better relationship, then maybe in some ways, right, we also want to work with the public to prevent crime. So if we are preventing crime before it even happens, right, this feeds into reducing crime to begin with because we're stopping it before it is even a problem. But also, improving thoughts in people's heads that the police are effective. There's, less crime overall. We feel good about that, right? So there's less danger to other people. Property is protected. Maybe there's less drug use or something, and so on, right? So these are all good intended outcomes that are, hopefully a result of an effective community policing practice. So the next video, we'll talk a little bit more about, what it takes to maybe get there, if we can get there in the first place.